What's the worst case of bad parenting you've ever witnessed? Lady I knew drank her entire pregnancy. Her excuse was it's cool because it was just hard sparkling water. She'd always down whole bottles of wine to herself. She then brought the baby to outdoor cookout when it was about 4 days old, got drunk and drove herself, her newborn, and her other daughter home. I freaking hate her so much. Edit, NSFL. I've been a city firefighter for 20 years next month, and much of that time has been spent working in a district that is extremely low income and high crime. So unfortunately I have seen a lot of children being raised in horrible conditions, especially these last 5 years with the assault of the heroin epidemic that is currently plaguing us. But the run that immediately came to mind happened about 10 years ago and wasn't drug related, but was simply horrible decision making by a parent. It was summer, late afternoon, and we were sent for a person struck by a vehicle. When we arrived, the patient, a 24-ish-year-old male, was on the ground in the middle of a large apartment complex access road, and he was being restrained by the ambulance crew. He had an altered level of consciousness, only responded to painful stimuli, his pupils were blown, or one was dilated and the other pinpoint, I can't remember, and he was combative as hell. He also had blood coming out of both ears, and when we used a 4x4 bandage to collect the blood, it showed it contained cerebral spinal fluid. Not good signs at all. As we jumped in to help the ambulance crew, I checked the car nearby for damage and found none. There was an older lady, maybe late 40s, standing next to the vehicle while she was being questioned by a police officer on the scene. Long story short, the patient started crashing fast. He was rushed to the hospital where we later learned he died. The police officer came over as we were cleaning up the scene and said, "Did you hear what happened?" Apparently the patient was the woman's son. She was leaving to go to the liquor store and had refused to buy her son beer. He got upset and jumped on her car, laughing, and said something like, "You're taking me there even if I have to ride out here." Then, according to her statement, she took off, gradually building up speed. He managed to climb from the hood to the roof where he was laying on his belly, screaming for her to stop, while holding onto the front windshield. She estimated she was going 30 to 40 miles per hour when she slammed on the brakes, shooting him headfirst into the road, killing her son. We offered to rent a room to a buddy of ours while he was going through his divorce. I walked into the kitchen to find his daughter, 7 years old, asking me to feed her because she's hungry. I was the only other person home, so I fed her and called him to see where the hell he was at. He was at the bar. He left his daughter at home, told no one. Edit, because so many were asking, I thought I'd fill you all in. The divorce was due to adultery. They've both caught each other a few times and I guess they finally decided to end it. I didn't know the kind of guy he really was. I always had the impression that it was his wife who was holding his family back, but it turns out it takes two to tango. He wasn't at the bar getting drunk. He was there chasing the bartender who he later moved into the house without even asking while jobless and living rent-free. The guy was a real posse, and the list of things could just go on and on. While I do not believe their daughter's well-being is in jeopardy, she is not being raised in a structured environment and her education is very much on their back burner. Unfortunately, giving your child little to no hope for their future is not a crime and there's nothing we can do about that. Parents who give soda to their babies/toddlers in bottles. The same parents who wonder why the kid needs 5 tooth extractions after the cavities set into their baby teeth. I know a kid who's an only child. His parents do everything for him, plate his food, cut it up for him, etc. His mom doesn't work, so she puts everything into taking care of this guy. The problem is that she still talks and interacts with him like he's 5 years old. As a result, he's this super sheltered, socially awkward 13-year-old. Talking to him you'd think he was 9. I feel bad for the guy. He's about to go into high school and I can already tell he's going to be one of those weird kids. I rented a room from a family when I was at college. They were always really harsh with their teenage daughter and super adoring with her older brother. I had to ask the dad to get rid of the signal jammer they had secretly installed to stop the daughter from being on her phone because I couldn't use my computer or phone. It randomly would kill the Wi-Fi signal. What really took the cake was the several hours, 3+, that the mother spent yelling at the daughter one day. It was like she was going through a book of shit not to say to your teenage daughter and said everything in there. You look like a hooker the way you put on your makeup, you'll never amount to anything. Why can't you be more like your brother? You are fat, stupid, useless, ugly, etc. Just totally laying on her. The mother would yell and complain about pretty much anything the daughter did, but that was really too far. Edit, I'm so sorry to hear about everyone that's lived through this. I'm sad to say I didn't intervene aside for sticking up for her when the parents talked to me about her directly and when I had to ask to have the jammer removed. This was by now almost 10 years ago in London and I was studying abroad. I didn't know the jammer was illegal, is it in the UK, and it was removed after about 2 weeks at my request. Took a week for me to ask them about the trouble I was having. I didn't report anything because honestly I wasn't really sure if it passed the line of abuse or not, having no experience at all with that sort of thing and being unsure of the UK law. This was around the time the Baby P case was exposed, where toddler was beaten to death and CPS had done several checks and done nothing. Edit 2, I've done some light Facebook stalking and the girl seems to be married and looks happy. She isn't friends with her dad on there, mum has no Facebook. When working in a box store about 10 years ago, a customer reported to me that they found a kid tied to a clothing rack. The mother had used her child leash to tie up her kid in an isolated corner while she shopped. We untied the kid, took him to my manager, and promptly called the cops. It was about 15 years ago when I was in high school. We were all coming out of school and a woman was passing by with a 5-year-old boy. The child seemed a bit overwhelmed by the crowds of people all of a sudden surrounding him and went to grab his mother's hand. The mother wouldn't hold his hand and instead started yelling at him, "Don't you worry baby, in about 10 years all these girls will be dropping their panties for you." The poor kid looked so scared and confused. I've never forgotten that line or that kid's face. So disturbing to see. My best friend was spoiled rotten by his dad. For his 15th birthday he got a top-of-the-line laptop for $3,000. Friend threw a hissy fit because he also wished for a moped. Naturally his father bought him a Derby Sender Extreme a few days later. He got everything he pointed at. Nowadays he's 28 and still has zero respect for money, had a gambling addiction for a decade, debts up to his neck, etc. He's taught to live in the fast lane and it has been freaking him over ever since he became an adult. I've posted this story before, but my friend wanted an iPod when they first came out. He saved his money for nearly a year to buy his own. When his parents took him to buy it, his little sister started throwing a tantrum because she wanted one too. His parents bought her one just to shut her up. I was going to pick up takeout food around after school time. There was a lady and a small boy around 5 to 6 standing by the parking lot. The boy was drinking a Coke, when then he turned and tossed it about 15 feet over by a tree. He looked at me and I said, "Are you just going to leave that there?" His mother whipped around and asked me if I was talking to her son. I replied that I was asking him if it was his intention to leave his litter by the tree. She went off about not talking to her child. There was a back and forth for about 15 seconds. Meanwhile the boy, realizing he was wrong, went to go pick up the can. The mom firmly told him no, but he said it's okay and walked over, picked up the can and walked back to his mom. She snatched it out of his hand and promptly threw it back by the tree, stared me down and dragged the boy across the street. Edit, 3 words plus full recovery from stroke. I know a few parents who refuse to say no to their children, giving them everything they want. You only have apple juice in the house but they want fruit punch? Well, go to the store and get it right then. It's ridiculous that the kids run the house. Knew a guy in high school whose mom fricked one of his friends after getting too drunk one night, while we were in high school. She also taught him that it's easier to ask for forgiveness than permission. His mom would buy us alcohol all the time. We were 16. He would have to pick her up from bars from the age of 13 because she was too smashed to drive herself home. Back then I thought she was the coolest. Looking back I realized that she was just a terrible mother and a pretty horrible person overall. Being at the autopsy of the 2-year-old who pulled a dresser down on himself because the parents were napping, aka faded from drugs. Oh, and he wasn't crushed. It was positional asphyxiation. So he stayed there and suffocated for about 5 minutes, alone and panicking. The thing with adult autopsies is the visual weight of the open torso. A bright red open rib cage. A child is different. The head is much bigger proportionally. The greatest visual weight was actually his mop of blonde hair on his big round head. Very distressing. I think about him most days. This woman, who I assumed was the little girl's grandma, kept dunking her granddaughter underwater at a hotel pool despite the girl's constant screaming and crying, totally oblivious to the fact that it was disturbing the entire hotel. I first read dunking on her, thinking there was a radical granny dunking on her kid on a poolside backboard. I used to work at Chuck E. Cheese, and boy, I saw a lot of bad parenting. A lot of people would use Chuck E. Cheese as a free babysitting service, since it was technically free to get in, and they would actually take naps at the tables, not buy tokens for their kids. This would happen all the time, and since I worked the floor and fixed the games, I would often just give these kids some tokens so they could at least play a couple of games. Bad stuff went down at Chuck E. Cheese. One time a dad pulled a knife on another dad because he thought that he stole his daughter's tickets. I worked at a Chuck E. Cheese's too. While cleaning the ball pit after hours, we found a handgun. Couple people from different parts of my life. A girl I worked with briefly was one of the most memorable. She was a few years older than me, and completely manipulated by her mother. If her mom didn't want her to come to work, she'd call out to do whatever her mother wanted her to do that day, whether it be drive her around or stick around at home to clean the house while her mom watched. If her mom thought she was faking anything, sickness or whatever she should have called out for, she'd come in and be terrified to be sent home. She once hid from the director for 2 days while she had the flu because she knew she'd be forced to go home if she was seen. I have no idea why she was so dependent on her mother, but eventually her mom got upset when she was asked to come in on a day she wasn't scheduled, and told the girl to quit. Hadn't seen her since. At a coffee shop, I saw a kid tell his mother that he needed to pee. Mom tells the kid to piss in a flower pot inside of the shop, and he promptly did while she carried on eating her breakfast as if nothing was wrong. Worst part is, not only am I sure that she knows where the bathrooms are, this idiot had just came with her kid from their home in the building where the coffee shop is. Had a student that grew up in a foster care home with 62 dogs. I was told after CPS intervened she would bark and crawl like a dog. This was a middle school aged child, mind you. When I met her she spoke English for the most part but was extremely quiet. When she was upset she would bark at other students occasionally. Edit, I looked up the old news article and it was 56 dogs in a duplex. 2 girls were rescued and I tutored the younger of the 2. She was 12 when CPS removed her from the home. Last night I spent 2 hours in the hospital with a 14-year-old girl that tried to kill herself, because I know both of her parents are freak-ups and couldn't be there for one shitty reason or another. But I was there, because she needed someone. Her mom is a drunk 24/7 and works second shift. Hasn't been there as a parent in years. The dad is on the run from the law and not allowed in the state she lives in. She is one of the smartest and coolest kids ever. It shouldn't have to come to this for her. She deserves a real adult, an actual functioning person in her life. My cousin was never told the word no growing up. If she didn't want to do something, she wasn't made to do it. It started when she was 2 years old and didn't want soap with her bath. As a child, they would let her interrupt any conversation they were having instead of telling her to wait. Things like this went on for nearly 20 years. The end up result is person A, who is now in her mid-20s and doesn't use soap to bath. She smells. We've talked to her about it. She's difficult to have a conversation or really any sort of interaction with her because she doesn't fully understand the concept of no. This also results in her being unable to hold a job even though she has a master's. She just gets in arguments with her bosses without realizing it and is then let go for unprofessional behavior. I've seen a 5-year-old bring their younger sibling into school so they can have a breakfast. It angers me more than I can explain that a child of 5 is getting their young sibling up, washed, dressed, and into a school so they can have a breakfast. Editing to make it clear that this is due to the parents being either drug addicts or alcoholics, and this is known by the school in question. My husband and I took my sister-in-law and our 11-year-old nephew to Warwick Castle a few years ago. We were walking around and saw this family. The child was about 13-14 and was overweight and obviously wasn't used to hearing the word no. He wanted an ice cream and his parents said no because they had just had candy floss. The kid started shouting and whining. Parents still said no. This teenage child then proceeded to stare down his parents, slowly get on the floor and then scream and cry and thrash around, having a full-on toddler tantrum right in the middle of the castle. The second his parents gave in, he stopped screaming and crying, got up and calmly walked to the ice cream place. My nephew turned to us and said what a baby and went to go look at the trebuchet. Lived in a condo and came home from work to see a small child no older than 7 crying outside the entrance door. It was -1 out, so it was extremely cold out. I let her inside and we walked to her condo, knocked on her door but no answer. I sat on the stairs with her and called the police. The cops came and I went down to my condo. After 15 minutes the police knocked on my door and told me what happened. The mom was home the entire time. She deliberately wouldn't buzz her kid in as punishment for forgetting the key code and waking her up with the buzzer. It was -1 outside. Edit: it was 1F. It was insanely cold outside. The girl was bundled up but not really enough to be standing outside longer than a few minutes. Edit 2: just to add to the story, I was lucky to even hear her. I lived on the bottom condo, which I came in and out of my patio door. I never used the main entrance, which was around the corner. I was running to go inside and only thinking about how cold it was. I heard something but wasn't sure what it was and frankly didn't care cause of the cold. I got my key in the lock and then I sort of heard a whimper, and that's when I went to investigate. Well, my parents both turned into alcoholics at when I was 8. And I basically didn't see them despite living with them, until after I moved out at 16. I was a nanny for 3 months for a family who ignored their child's special needs. The youngest daughter had mild behavioral issues and developmental delays, but her parents would either ignore her needs or call her outbursts cute. The parents knew she had to wear glasses to prevent degradation of her eyesight, but since the girl didn't like them, she didn't have to wear them. They had 3 kids between the ages of 10 and 13, and I've never met such spoiled kids. We couldn't get through a board game without someone crying and throwing something. They would whine to their parents until they gave in. The older daughter called her mother worthless to her face because she wouldn't take her to the pool. Several tantrums a day and phone calls to their mom every 20 minutes were considered normal. The mom pretty much let them run the roost. The whole time I was taking care of them, they never had a single play date. No other kids wanted to be around them. I finally quit because the oldest girl told me daily that I was not doing my job correctly. Stupid brat. I worked with a very wealthy family that owned a jewelry store. They wouldn't allow their wheelchair-bound son to use the wheelchair in the house because it would mark up the floors. He'd have to be carried or drag himself in the house. My sister. Kids are always right, especially her golden child, the first boy. If any of her children scratch or bite you and you tell them no or refuse to carry them straight after, she will yell at you. She has pulled golden boy out of school, other two are too young to go to homeschool him. She's doing a sort of homeschooling though, where I don't actually teach them anything. Poor kid is 10 and struggles making friends or being social, and she has just further damned him socially by doing this. He has no chance of a future if he's not taught English or basic math. Everyone who's seen him recently says he just shore in his room and reads books all day every day because he's so bored. He doesn't care about anyone else's emotions or feeling and is a bully who can't share because he is so used to always getting his way. My sister says it's right because no one should force him to share, and he shouldn't have to share if he doesn't want to. She doesn't explain to him that the flip side of this is that other kids don't have to like you when you treat them like shit. And inviting friends around to watch you play with toys that you won't share with anyone is treating people like shit in my eyes.